AI happening, which is like this exponential increase in demand and these huge concentrated loads, and you're electrifying everything, like you mentioned, heat, transportation, and we're putting all that on the grid, and we're retiring power plants that are dispatchable. So kind of this, again, that is kind of the slow motion train wreck that the grid's going through right now.
Welcome back to DAM, the official podcast of Northwest Hydropower. I'm your host, Austin Rohr, and I manage all things communications here at Northwest RiverPartners. It's not often that we actually get to have a guest on the podcast who's able to join us right here in the RiverPartners HQ studio. So when we do, it's a pretty big deal. In fact, it's only ever happened one other time, and that was with our executive director, my boss, Kurt Miller, and I'm not even sure that counts since he's kind of supposed to be here anyways. So when he informed me that we had a potential podcast guest in mind who'd be willing to fly all of the way here from Houston, Texas to be on, I was all for it. Apparently today's guest, Thomas McAndrew, was too, because he actually did fly out, and he's here to continue the conversation on DAM about microgrid technology and much more, and become our first official in-studio guest here on the podcast. Thanks for going the extra 1,825 miles to make this happen today.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Austin.
And we also do have the privilege of having Kurt join us in for today's discussion. So glad to have you back on this side of the window.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. I appreciate you letting me back on the podcast.
So, normally the first question that I ask right out of the gate is like, okay, what do you do for your job? What does it look like day to day, everything like that? But maybe in this case, because we're talking about something out of our region, we should start with where you're at and the place that you're doing that job. And so most people here in the Northwest won't have heard of Enchanted Rock, but you have a major footprint in Texas and other regions from what I understand. What is Enchanted Rock and what services do you provide there?
Sure. Enchanted Rock provides electrical resiliency as a service to commercial industrial customers, and we really try to make it like this super painless thing for them, where we provide kind of the whole soup to nuts as far as installing natural gas microgrids at their facility, and we do everything, the design, the engineering, build, commission, operate, and we do this in a way where we can actually take all these different microgrids and aggregate them and then basically sell back to the electric grid operators. And that allows us to bring the cost down to our customers to a fraction of what it would have been if they were doing it on their own. So we actually look at it as two different customers. One is we have the local electrical resiliency customer that wants to keep their lights on when the power is not there for whatever reason. It could be some kind of storm that came through. It could be wildfires and what we're seeing more and more, where the local utility has to cut power to avoid starting wildfires. It could be rolling blackouts like we've seen in California and Texas recently. But for whatever reason, they need to they have some type of critical service that they're providing or high cost of business interruption, and they need to keep power to that facility. So they're our first customer. Our second customer is the grid operator. And what we do is when we turn on, it's usually some type of stress condition on the grid. And so what we do is we're providing grid stability services. We're helping to stabilize the grid when it gets into an unstable condition. And we're really starting to see that a lot in high renewables penetration markets. California, Texas are two great examples of that, and that's where we're doing a lot of business in both of those areas. And so you think of us as contingency capacity for the local customer when power, that last mile or whatever, for whatever reason they can't get the power that they need, and then contingency capacity for the grid operator so they can kind of smooth out the rough edges around an intermittent supply stack that again has some unpredictability to it, and so that's kind of the core of the business.
So I just talked to Energy Northwest, who up here does a lot of different services. Maybe not quite in the same way, but they provide energy through nuclear, and they've got some other, it sounds like, wind and solar projects, different things. And then you have us, for example, who we have members across the region that we're representing and advocating for with the hydropower system. For Enchanted Rock, does that work kind of the same way, where you have maybe like members as utilities, or are you working more with, say, like a commercial customer?
So we work with the commercial customer, but we're also working with the local utility. In certain cases, if there's no market structure, like a competitive market, we'll work with that local utility. For example, we have a deal with Entergy, which is Louisiana, Arkansas, parts of Mississippi, where we actually build the microgrid, the natural gas microgrid, and sell it to them, and then have a long-term operations and maintenance contract, and they provide the service to that final commercial industrial customer. So we're pretty flexible in who we work with. We're actually looking at more and more at different types of applications that are in front of the meter. Our business in California right now, in one case we work directly with Microsoft at a data center in San Jose, but in another case we're working directly with Department of Water Resources for emergency capacity. We have three sites, each just under 50 megawatts. It's just emergency capacity for the grid, and we're dispatched by the CAISO, and so the California Independent System Operator. So we're pretty flexible on who we're actually working with, and it's really dependent on the structure of within a certain region, and we'll work to figure that out, what the best way is to transact.
So maybe I'll jump in here, and I think I'm only here to help translate.
Yeah, why are you?
That was a good question. Thomas said he wouldn't go on unless I was here. That's actually the only reason that I got to come on the podcast today. But I think, and for those who have listened to DAM, you know what a microgrid is, right? Because Austin has had a couple of microgrid folks on recently. But just as a reminder to folks, my understanding of a microgrid is that if the main grid is having some trouble, like where people would normally get their electricity from, you can essentially have those people disconnect from that grid, and you can power that area. Is that the right description?
That's correct. So we talk about our microgrids as resiliency microgrids, and so when we say resiliency, that means that there's a duration associated with this. So you hear about microgrids with batteries and solar, but it's very short duration. Typically, if you're looking at full power, maybe only 2 or 4 hours, or you cut it way back, and then you can get 24 hours, but it's at 10 or 20% of the total. In our business, we have to provide 100%. Like, we're backing up hospitals and senior living facilities, water utilities, and they need 100% of their operation backed up, so they don't have the ability to kind of cut way back or only operate during a certain number of hours. And so we have to have a fuel. And initially this role was filled by diesels, and we had several concerns with diesels, and so we moved towards natural gas. But kind of the biggest concern we had, it's very, very difficult to move diesel over road during severe weather events. It becomes hard, and so the amount of the duration of the resiliency is usually what you have in a tank, which and most of the diesels have what's called day tanks. It's set up to last a day, and so we needed something that could last for weeks, months, however long we needed to run without having to refuel, and so we moved towards basically pipeline provided natural gas. The second is it's just a much cleaner fuel. You can achieve much lower local emissions, and even the cleanest diesel, we're in many cases we're 80-90% cleaner than even the cleanest diesel. We actually have a certification with the California Air Resources Board. It's called their distributed generation emissions limits, and we're the only reciprocating engine that actually can meet those limits.
That's awesome.
And we had to do that to do the business we're doing in California. So we fuel with natural gas. In certain cases, we actually purchase renewable natural gas offsets to fully decarbonize, and so we can get to ultra low local emissions. That again, they're just orders of magnitude less than what you would see with the normal emergency backup diesel, and we can fully decarbonize. And that actually was one of the requirements of the deal with Microsoft in California. From a kind of an architecture perspective, you're correct, Kurt. We can isolate from the grid and then run for days on end if we have to, if the grid's damaged or for whatever reason can't deliver. We can also run interconnected with the grid.
Oh, interesting.
What we do is we displace the local load, and then anything we have above that load will export back onto the grid. And that model works really well. And then we have this physical microgrid at all our customers' facilities that literally behind the meter, that again, so you can isolate and keep them in business. And then we'll aggregate all the individual microgrids. And I always get a little bit upset when I heard like people say virtual power plant. It's not. There's nothing virtual.
It's actual power plant.
It's an actual power plant. And so, but it's an aggregation of all these different microgrids, and then we turn that into kind of this block of power that we can provide to the grid operators, right? And so where we have all of these different microgrids that are operating interconnected with the grid. What we want to do when we run for grid purposes, we don't want to cause any interruption to our customers. And so that's an incredibly important concept for us. And so we basically have to be able to operate in an interconnected way so they don't see any disruption to their operations. Taking a step further on the microgrid concept, we actually do integrate other types of renewables behind the meter. We'll integrate solar. We have a lot of customers that have on-site solar, on-site batteries. And so we have the ability to basically integrate those into our resiliency microgrid. And that further helps us reduce emissions and cost for our customers.
So that's why I think it's so awesome. That's really why. There's a lot of reasons I wanted to have Thomas on the show. We were talking before.
I thought it's just because you liked it.
I've known Thomas, for basically 30 years. So, but not only that, but I mean, we've been talking a little bit about microgrids.
Sound old when you say that.
I know, right? I know. But the thing that's so cool is you guys are actually doing it.
Yes.
And I mean, there's we hear a lot of theory out there about microgrid, right? And they're pilot projects, and that's all cool. I think that's great. But it's so cool to talk to somebody who is actually doing it commercially. So I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, we actually don't do pilots. When we hear about pilots, like, no, we do real production microgrids, and we just don't. I mean, we've been hearing about pilots for microgrids for the last 20 years. Right. We think we should be out of that phase. But yeah, we're definitely in the trenches, figuring it out every day. And there's, like a lot of things in life, things get oversimplified. It's just operating, and we call it interconnected or synchronously with the electric grid at these different sites can be a challenge because every utility has their own standards as far as how you actually connect to their grid. They have to maintain a safe grid, and that's our responsibility is to help them do that when we interconnect. But it's interesting. We've learned a lot.
That's so cool. And then the last thing, and then I'll turn it back over to Austin. But you mentioned the need for multi-day fuel, and if I remember right, you all really saved the day during a big hurricane in the Gulf Coast or in Houston. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It was Hurricane Harvey, and we're kind of early stage in our natural gas microgrid ramp, but we had about 21, 22 microgrids that were in operation for a little bit over a week. It was really interesting. But what we've seen, and really, I guess this happens pretty efficiently through social media, but people quickly find out the facilities that have power when the power's out, right?
Yes.
What we've learned is that grocery stores have kind of become this new critical infrastructure. We see that during almost any severe weather event. It could be a hurricane, it could be a winter storm like we had Winter Storm Uri. During the pandemic, grocery stores became incredibly important, and so they're this emerging critical infrastructure. We know water is critical, and hospitals and things like that. But this is, I think, a relatively new concept. And so what happened? We had several grocery stores. There's a regional chain called HEB in the Texas area Also there's a store called Buc-ee's. I know not many people in the Northwest have heard of Buc-ee's, but it's this crazy thing. It's this gas station concept that's like times 1,000, and they're on the interstates, and they'll have like 150 gas pumps and these huge 80,000, 100,000 foot stores, and they started off with their interstate format by having super clean bathrooms, and so the families wanted to stop. It sounds kind of silly, but
it doesn't sound silly to me.
But anybody especially with a growing family knows how important that is, right? So they're this as big as a grocery store kind of gas station convenience store, but they're humongous, and they just keep growing. Well, what happened in Katy, Texas, which is a little bit west of Houston, during Hurricane Harvey, they lost power, pretty severe damage, some tornadoes, and we had literally just commissioned that microgrid the week prior, and there was a lot of flooding and everything else, and so a lot of the first responders were in that region, and they found out, okay, the Buc-ee's has power, and at first the fire chief called the owner of the store. It's still a private company, a large private company. Say, hey, can we kind of set up this as our local headquarters, that your Buc-ee's? And he said, sure. None of the employees were there, but they had power. And then 12 hours later, the National Guard shows up, and the commander calls the owner, say, can we make this our headquarters as well? Not a problem, right? So now you have the fire, all the first responders, the National Guard, and it's funny, we have pictures of this. I should have brought them, but and they're all at this Buc-ee's. And then about 6 hours later, the CEO of the Guard calls the owner, hey, do you mind if we start cooking some food? He said, well, that's fine, but there's a process for that, and they have these things where this big kitchen and where they make food and serve it, and so he said, the employees know that, but they're not in there right now, and the commander says that's not a problem. So they literally went out with the Humvees and helicopters, brought the employees back to this Buc-ee's, and now they're feeding all the troops. And so it was super cool to be a part of that, because there was no power at the time, and that was all powered on our natural gas microgrid, and that ran for 5-6 days. And so it's really important when you're talking about the resiliency aspect of this. You have to have a fuel. You have to be able to kind of continue operations, whatever that is. And so so that was a good theory to practice. And we find that the natural gas infrastructure has the opposite from a deliverability perspective as the diesel supply chain does. The deliverability of diesel during severe weather events just drops dramatically. It doesn't matter what the event is, and whereas natural gas goes up because the actual load on the system is going down, and so you actually get higher pressures and during like a hurricane. And then during the winter storm, we had a similar situation where we had lost power in some places for as much as 3 days, and you heard about problems with natural gas in Texas when that happened, but we just didn't see that. You just have to know how to purchase the natural gas, and not to get into the technical details, but you have to buy the right kind of
level of firmness,
right. and that has some type of storage behind it, and that's what we do, and so we haven't really had any issues with natural gas. It's been a great supply for us, much cleaner, and again, even during all the severe weather events that we've seen, it just has been very dependable for us.
That's awesome. Well, and Austin and I are definitely going to check out Buc-ee's next time.
It's have you seen the beaver mascot?
Yeah, they're legendary.
Man. Yeah,
legendary.
Yeah. I have a family member that moved down there, and I see Buc-ee's photos on social media all the time now. So
it's quite it's an event to go to.
But I will say this: that's a really cool story.
Yeah, it was. It's the neat thing about the company. We're kind of this mission-driven company. We get super excited about being able to help our customers during those times of stress and need, and it really motivates our team, our employees, and so that's fun to see. So
yeah, absolutely. I have a question for you that I think is so much less involved than anything we've discussed so far, but It came to mind last night, actually, as I was kind of getting geared up and ready for today's podcast. We have every now and then some people that we get to interact with, that whether it's our membership or other organizations or whoever, that have awesome names. And I think Kurt and I would agree probably one of those at the top of our list would be Vigilante Electric.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just
seriously, I'm so proud they're members.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's nothing to say that our other members aren't as equally loved in other ways, but the name is just fantastic. So I have to ask, like, what's the story behind the name itself of Enchanted Rock?
Enchanted Rock. So, I think I just kind of stumbled into it, but maybe it's interesting. Maybe not. I'll let you guys be the judge.
We'll edit it out.
Right. So I spent, as Kurt did, spent a lot of time in the early days in merchant power and deregulation, kind of at the wholesale level, and just really enjoyed that. Actually, working with Kurt a lot and transacting, first type of transactions. I remember spending a lot of time up here. I mean, I traded West Power and spending a lot of time up here just getting to know a lot of the local utilities, the public utility districts, et cetera, and trying to develop relationships and be able to transact with them. But kind of did that, and everything just kind of fell apart right around 2001, 2002, and it started off with Enron going bankrupt, and then there was a pretty big overbuild of the natural gas combined cycles, and working for Calpine at the time, and managing kind of the commercial risk as far as buying gas and selling power, doing that current and out through however many years, and the whole industry just kind of imploded for a while there, and I said, like, I'm done with this kind of this path that we've been on. It just doesn't feel great, and I don't know the purpose of this, and I gotta find another way, and maybe we can talk about it later. But I knew that the direction was really getting close to customers, and helping them solve their problems, and that was kind of like the place to be versus transacting at basically on the high voltage transmission lines, and as far as buying and selling power. So I said, now that the opportunity, whether it's to help decrease cost or increase reliability, is really at the final point of consumption, at or close to the final point of consumption. And but I had no idea what that meant, and so I just was kind of lost and wandering around. And we went to school with a friend that had a lot of land out in Lukenbach, Texas, and which is about probably 15 miles from Enchanted Rock. Enchanted Rock is this big granite dome, kind of almost pinkish in color, and it's beautiful. And so I actually had a deer lease on that property, and spent a lot of time. I told my wife that I'm like a mess. I'm going to go out there for a week or two, kind of think this through, and then just spent a lot of time hiking Enchanted Rock, and then just kind of go for a hike, come back, write some stuff down, lather, rinse, repeat a few times, that same thing, and so it just kind of worked on the concepts of the business. This is about 21 years ago, 2002, 2003 time frame, and I said, I'm just going to steal the name of the rock for the company. So the company's name is Enchanted Rock, but it's a state park in Texas. It's maybe an hour due west of Austin, out in what's called the Hill Country, and so it's just a beautiful country, and it's a neat rock, and the Native Americans back in the day, they called it enchanted because it makes this kind of almost these groaning sounds, it's basically just the rock moving it, and when it cools down.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so
because it probably gets plenty hot.
Yes, so it'll get really hot, and then it'll cool down, and you'll hear these groaning sounds as the slabs kind of move against each other, and different rates, right? The whole thermal expansion contraction thing, but yeah, it's a fantastic place, and it helped me clear my head to work through the initial concepts of the business a while ago.
We didn't get to pick the name Northwest RiverPartners, and but we're not the Coalition for Smart Salmon Recovery, which is, I think,
is a mouthful. Yeah, that's our former name.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we, I did notice, like, and it happens every time we travel. When we were at the conference this week, trying to check into the hotel or whatever, it's like, okay, yeah, it's nwriverpartners.org. No, you forgot the I, or you left out the N.
Yeah, it's a long. It's like it's northwestriverpartners.org. It's okay to relate to someone, but if you have to type it out like one digit at a time or something like that,
right?
And it's amazing how many times I have personally misspelled partners.
It's easy to do. So I think that's a good way to kind of segue into talking a little bit more about your background, which I understand is fairly diverse. I have here that you were stationed on a Navy nuke ship. You have an MBA from Harvard. You've traded some energy out here in the West, and you've maybe contemplated sailing around the world, which we can get into a little later. And you've obviously launched Enchanted Rock. Could you tell us a little bit about the background that led you up to the point and kind of the role that you found yourself in now?
Yeah, my background it has kind of been accidental. I think I just keep stumbling into the next thing, but in hindsight, it's kind of interesting because it prepared me perfectly for what I'm doing now, and so mechanical engineering. I was a grease monkey in high school. And so, without a whole lot of thought to it, so I guess I want to be a mechanical engineer, and went to Texas A&M, and that worked out well. I was in the Corps there, which is this full-time ROTC thing, and I'm sure from the outside it looks pretty crazy, but enjoyed it, and ended up getting a commission in the Navy, and went through the nuke power program. Was on a carrier, the USS Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and then a cruiser, South Carolina. The Ike is still around, the South Carolina isn't. But yeah, two nuke ships. And actually, a lot of the core concepts for Enchanted Rock came out of my time in the nuke Navy. Mm-hmm. And it's just super important as far as kind of the design, operations, maintenance of a high reliability system. And I kind of recognized later on, it's like, my gosh, the backup industry is like, it really isn't operated with the level of expertise and diligence it needs to be, and it's probably better as an outsourced business. But kind of the example I always use on that, on my second ship, I was responsible for all the diesels on the ship, and there's kind of had two ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum, we had what's called the emergency diesel generators, and if everything just goes to crap, you are leaning on those heavily, and they keep water going through the reactor core to keep it cooled, right? And if the diesels fail, you literally have to tow the ship out and scuttle it, right? Sink it.
Wow.
And so it's a pretty severe thing. It's important for reactor safety, and so we have two of those, and it was just amazing, the attention to detail. You would walk in the space, and they were beautiful. I sound like a geek saying that, but they were beautiful diesels. They were painted, and just everything was clean. The maintenance was always perfect. They would run every week fully loaded, and they would exercise the system, and that's one of the concepts that we bring to Enchanted Rock. And we talked about the grid runs earlier. And you make money, but you're also exercising the system, right? And it's good it's an engine, it wants to run. So that was one end of the spectrum, and they ran, and when we needed to run, they would run, because we did run them enough. And again, the operations and maintenance were fantastic. The design was right. The other end of the spectrum that I had was responsible for the diesels on the ship's boats. And oh my gosh, that was difficult. You can't run them loaded. They're sitting in what's called davits when you're underway. I can't remember. We had 3 or 4 on the South Carolina, but you really didn't get a chance to load them until you put them in the water, and then you put all the boats. You pull into port. I don't know, pull into Marseille, France, whatever, and go to drop the boats, and 50% would actually run, right? And so it's like, oh my gosh. And so I usually spent the first day or two in port getting my butt chewed by the captain, why aren't the boats all running? It's like, and the maintenance just wasn't as good, and it's like, okay, that's not how to run.
We learn a lot from things that don't work as well, right?
So it was interesting because you fast forward, and I'll kind of get to the time in between in a second, but fast forward to Hurricane Ike, which was really our catalyst. This is 2008 in Houston. Saw the same kind of level of failure with commercial and industrial backup generation, about 50% for, and typically that'll work well for a day or two, but then things just happen, right? And so it was really, really bad, and it looked like the ship's boat. So like, oh, I recognize that, right? So, but yeah, so that was kind of my background on the Nuke Navy. Got out of the Nuke Navy, went to work at Alabama Power, part of Southern Company, one of their nukes, Plant Farley, and did that for about a year. And I said, no, this isn't what I want to do. At the time, I was maybe a little bit younger than you, Austin, but I was, I think, like 27, 28, something like that. And I could tell at the time, it's like, okay, this industry's not growing. I don't see a future here. And so I just said, I need to go find out what to do, and applied to Harvard, and for some crazy reason it let me in. I still don't understand that to this day. I think it was like a social experiment. Let's see if this guy can, with this weird background, can he function here, right? So, did that. Got the MBA, and when I was up at business school, it was interesting because there was this big debate going on in Boston about deregulation of the electricity markets, and I think it was Professor Hogan at the Harvard Kennedy School, and Professor Joskow at MIT, and there was kind of this debate between poolco versus bilateral, and the markets generally went towards the poolco model, we created all these independent system operators as far as the deregulated markets. But it was neat being up there to be a part of that, and then just say, okay, I want to go to somewhere in this newly deregulating power market.
And deregulated essentially means that non-utilities were able to participate.
Right.
Is that right?
Right. So utilities, non-utilities, but we have the ability to transact kind of at the wholesale level between different participants. Again, financial participants, the utilities, and I just said, like, wow, this looks really exciting, and ended up working at Enron for about 3 years, and this is when Kurt and I met. It was probably the second year I was at Enron, started trading West Power under Scott Neal, and so that was kind of the first taste of the commercial side. I understood power generation very well from a kind of an engineering, operations, maintenance perspective, and now the commercial side, and that actually the understanding of the kind of the physics of power really helped me when I started to trade power. I could tell, okay, this outage is a 2-day outage or a 2-week outage when you hear about why a certain power plant went down. And so, and actually there was early days of the internet too, and trying to figure out what was going on with all the flows, the river flows up here, and that was exciting stuff, and that was pioneering, like, okay, I think I figured out some way to read this web.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So it was exciting stuff, but did that and for 3 years, and then ironically when Enron bought Portland General, at the time it's like I was trading West Power, so this is going to sound bad. My choice was to move to Portland and continue to trade West Power, or find something else to do. I said, well, I'll find something else to do. It wasn't nothing against Portland.
Your home was in Houston.
I know, my home is Houston, and so I said all my family's in Houston, and so I wanted to stay in Houston, and went to work for another company, Statoil, but doing the same things, trading West Power, and then kind of this. I sound like I'm rambling, but there is something relevant here. At the end of the time at Statoil, we were trading West Power, and this was kind of going into, this was 99, and started to see there's a bit of a supply-demand imbalance that was building, and the summer of 99 had been incredibly weak, and we said, it looks like maybe things are going to be different next year, and started building up a long position at different points in the West as far as just owning the power. And then Statoil decided to get out of the business, and they said, you need to liquidate your position. I said, well, I really, this is a great position for us. We had made some money on it, I said, if we're going to do that, then I just want to sell directly to the utilities to see if there's a way I can help the utilities, because we owned about 2,000 megawatts of power at the time, and so my good friend Corey Amthler and myself, we were working together at Statoil. We literally flew into San Diego and rented a Mustang convertible and went to see San Diego, Southern Cal Edison, and PG&E. They said, we got power to sell. You guys want to buy some? And San Diego and PG&E weren't interested, but Southern Cal Edison was, and we ended up selling them most of that power. And they brought us, and then this was like late fall of 99, and the shop was shut down in early 2000. And then we started actually consulting for Southern Cal Edison and helping them with a few things, and we realized back then, okay, there might be some issues with rolling blackouts, and this is when we started the precursor for Enchanted Rock. We called it Progressive Power Solutions, and Kurt, you remember that?
I do.
And we were working in the San Francisco Bay Area, Sun Microsystems, at a facility in Newark, in East Bay, manufacturing servers, and wanted to look at some backup options, and we made a lot of progress on that, but we realized we were very early, and the last mile connectivity is critical to us. That just didn't exist back then. A lot of the control systems that we needed, like on site, were super expensive, and then the electricity markets are still too immature as far as their ability for us to participate. And so we realized, okay, that's kind of early. It was way early, and ended up selling that to Calpine and putting the same team we had at Statoil, putting that back together and help them manage their combined cycle build out. So that was kind of that stretch of experience, the engineering, operations, maintenance, and then kind of the commercial side, and then then boom, everything's gone. They go out to Enchanted Rock, and then say, okay, that time at Progressive Power was kind of what helped us learn, like the opportunity really is at that final point of consumption, and the initial kind of iteration of Enchanted Rock was formed in 2003, but really did a lot of consulting with customers to try to understand what their challenges were, and then we actually launched an energy hedge fund in 2004, and then ran into 2005 and said, oh, this doesn't make any sense. We're fundamental people, and there was just a lot of money in the market, and it's like, okay, we're not going to do it.
It was crazy, like the stock market.
It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy, and interesting enough that was the same time there was a lot of money in everything. That was 2 or 3 years before the big financial crisis, and there's too much money flowing around. It's like, this isn't our game. And so shut down the hedge fund, gave the money back. And one of the hardest things I ever had to do, and we were actually, I think we were down maybe 5%, 7%, something like that. But shut it down and just said, no, I'm going to just focus on Enchanted Rock. And then we formed Enchanted Rock in 2006. And really the core theme was we were focusing on what we could do to help customers reduce cost, increase reliability, decrease carbon footprint and local emissions. And that was in 2006. And it sounds all obvious now. In 2006, it really wasn't. And it was just me to start with, and then started slowly adding people. But it really my background is that combination of technical and markets. And so it ended up, although I just like I said, stumbled into a lot of different things along the way, it ended up being the perfect background for where we are now with Enchanted Rock, which is this unique combination of technology and electricity and energy markets total, and how do we build what are the right building blocks to create value for our customers, create value for the grid operators, do right by our investors so they have a good return and have an excited kind of team. So my background ended up, like I said, being perfect for what I do now. So.
And when you say you were kind of early to it, would you say it was more a matter of the technology, or would you say that it was more maybe the folks that you were trying to work with wrapping their head around this idea of having this reliable backup?
A lot of people at the time had backup, so I don't know. Maybe the concept of backup wasn't that crazy. It's probably more the technology. and really last mile connectivity and on-site controls, microgrid type controls. Everything was just really expensive. It was a great idea, but we just couldn't. We were just too early. What's interesting is after Hurricane Ike, a lot of those things that we were early on, like it was exactly the right time, right? And so you look at like a genset controller or a microgrid controller. I mean, it cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, and just for a simple controller back in 2000, and then by 2009, 2010, I mean, we were buying microgrid controllers for like $5,000.
Oh wow!
It was crazy and like 10x more powerful, and likewise on connectivity, right? Last mile connectivity just was non-existent in so many places. As far as high bandwidth connectivity, and in 2000, and then by 2009 is ubiquitous, right? So a lot of the technology pieces came together.
I interrupt this podcast to bring you an advertisement from none other than ourselves. What if the Northwest suddenly lost all hydropower? Half of our local energy would immediately disappear and be replaced with dirty fossil fuels. Greenhouse gases would rise, along with our electric bills. Because without hydropower, 80% of the Northwest's renewable energy would be gone. Thankfully, hydropower remains abundant, affordable, and 100% carbon-free. Our power is water. Learn more at northwestriverpartners.org. Now, back to your favorite water power podcast.
The one thing I will interject because Thomas and I have exchanged ideas a lot over the years, and been sounding boards for each other, and also rant buddies if we want to rant.
We're good at encouraging each other to rant.
Yeah, exactly. We would rant, but what I do think that it was, I did some outreach on behalf of Progressive Power to some different like key industries.
Yep.
And they weren't aware at the time either of kind of the state of where the grid was going in terms of a lack of reliability.
Right.
So
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Right. So, and honestly, that has been true until I would say the last 2 or 3 years.
Right.
That there's this assumption the grid will provide, and a lot of businesses made that assumption. It's like, well, utilities will fix it, whatever. But now, for a lot of different reasons. That assumption has changed. We've seen a significant change as far as kind of the business leaders and their assumption about what the grid can provide, and whether just on an ongoing basis or even new services is very, very difficult now. I think what we've done differently, we actually have created a new market for electrical resiliency because, like we were talking about earlier, the way we monetize the grid revenues, and so. We don't ask our customers to take electricity market risk. What we do is our investors take that, and then we create a price point for our customer to buy electrical reliability that's much lower than they could have ever done previously. And so they get this great microgrid at a fraction of the cost. And our investors basically what they get is the customer is effectively contributing or sharing in the cost of that microgrid through a relatively low payment, right? And then so the investor's like, well, that's great. They're effectively subsidizing the cost of this asset, and so I can get a better return. And then from a customer perspective, they're saying the investors are taking they're taking that risk on that capital, right? I have a small contribution, so it's kind of a win-win cost sharing model. And that's kind of how we've developed in the deregulated markets, and now we're actually getting more and more interest in that same model with the regulated vertically integrated utilities. And so there is kind of two things have happened on like as far as customers' perception. One is that changing assumptions on grid reliability, and the second is kind of this price point where they're like, okay, this does make sense for me to like effectively buy physical business interruption insurance, and versus them going out and having to pay a much higher price, and the kind of the headache of building and operating this electrical backup system, which, I mean, most people don't want to be in that business. They just don't. They want to do whatever they do. They want to be grocers. They want to run a water pumping station or a hospital or whatever it is.
Hydropower advocates.
Yeah. You just want your license.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so there are a couple things I would say. One, I mean, your background is perfect for that, which is really cool. I mean, you never know. I'm a person of faith. You never know where God will lead you, but it's amazing that your bizarre background, right?
It is bizarre.
Your eclectic background has come together to create this really neat opportunity.
Right.
The other thing is we need to give a shout out to your wife Jay, who said not only is she very, very patient with you, but also she wouldn't let you retire after you were done trading, so you had to find something else to employ yourself. So
and then even when it came time to really move things forward with Enchanted Rock, I remember sitting on our porch talking. I said, I'm getting ready to, this is going to happen. We're going to make it work. And are you okay with it? Because I think I'm getting ready to spend the kids' college fund.
Right.
And we did, but it ended up working out fine in the end. But I mean, she's been incredibly supportive all the way, and my gosh, I love her, and I can't say enough about how much she's helped over the years. So
that's great. That is great.
One thing I wanted to ask you too was, the decision on going with the natural gas side of things instead of traditional diesel. But I kind of feel like you've answered that as we've gone throughout the discussion. So maybe I'll kind of reframe it this way. As far as the natural gas side of things go, I mean, we talk so much about, clean carbon-free energy and the hydropower space, and that's a big topic that we've covered on the podcast, as well as all the kind of other renewables that are coming. But my understanding is that, as you mentioned, like with the California example, the natural gas you're working with isn't in that same category of being this, dirty fossil fuel thing that people are, shying away from. How exactly, let's say I was in the 5th grade and for some reason was really interested in natural gas backup generators, but I also couldn't. But I also but I also wasn't going to understand, the maybe more nuanced part of it. What does that look like? I mean, how does that work as far as being able to offer this while still maintaining sort of this clean energy?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just piggyback on that. And we are seeing states like California, Oregon, Washington, and others, I think Nevada, eventually say no natural gas. And so will that impact your business model? So anyway, a couple questions there.
Yeah. So actually, I think quite a few different things to unpack.
Starting with 5th grade, Thomas.
Yeah, I was trying to go back to 5th grade, and so I guess the most important concept for us is resiliency, right? And long duration resiliency, and whatever our customers are doing, it's critical, and so they have to be able to run for days on end. So and unless and until we have like nukes about as big as this table, you still need a fuel that you bring in, and I could get going on nukes for a while, but I won't. That's not what this podcast is about. But that'll be another future one. But you have to have a fuel, right? And so it's like I don't know. I get a little bit frustrated because there's a lot of idealism right now in the energy business, electricity business, but have been around the electricity business for a while will tell you the same thing. Like, we have to kind of be responsible, and you have to meet that responsibility first, right? And look, we absolutely believe that you have to be good citizens with regards to the local community and the global community on emissions, and so then kind of, I don't know, maybe I have to step out of the 5th grade for a second, but with natural gas again, and we get to these ultra low levels of emissions, right? And quite frankly, we don't run that often. I mean, a big year for us is like 3-4% of the hours we're going to run.
Yeah,
so
that's not very much
so,
at all.
So if you look at our emissions on a per hour basis, they're incredibly low, and then we don't run much. And when we run, it's an emergency, and you want us to run, right? Whether it's a grid or for a customer, a reliability customer, right? And so the local emissions are incredibly low. And also we focus a lot, not just on air emissions, but sound. And we have an ultra quiet genset because we have to be good neighbors, again, good local neighbors, right? And then from a global perspective, really it's carbon. And what's interesting about carbon, it is global, right? And so you have different levels of emissions, and you have certain emissions that are incredibly local, like NOx, right? And then the sulfur dioxide stuff, the SOx, that we've kind of gotten control of, but that was more regional. And then carbon is, CO2 is global, right? And it's not just CO2, but it's methane. So you think about renewable natural gas, and like, what is that? Well, basically we have organic material that's decomposing, and methane's being released into the atmosphere when that happens. I mean, that's just like physics or nature, whatever you want to call it, but that's what happens. And we're capturing that methane, and we're turning it into pipeline quality fuel, and it's being injected into a pipeline. And so when you look at that, methane is like in a 20-year basis is like 75 times more powerful than carbon dioxide, and over 75 years about 20 times. So methane is an incredibly potent global warming gas. Right. It just is, and so we should be capturing it. What's always interesting to me, and again, if I get on a rant, tell me to stop. Like how is it like solar is like this first-class citizen of renewables, but capturing methane isn't? It's like, wait a second, that methane's pretty darn powerful. We should be capturing it and using it. So if you can capture that methane and anywhere, and because it's global, and inject it into a pipeline, and it's directly offsetting the natural gas that we're consuming. So what we've done is we've taken methane that's just being released, the worst case, and then put it in a pipeline, and then we consume it with ultra low local emissions, right? And so that's kind of a good outcome.
Right? Yeah, that's a great outcome.
And so and we're providing resiliency, and so we're seeing more and more interest in this model where we actually are buying the physical renewable natural gas offsets. We have a data center deal that we're working on in Texas right now, which is the same structure as the Microsoft, where it's the CARB DG local emission standards, ultra low local emissions, and then all gas we consume has to be physically offset by a purchase of renewable natural gas that's injected into the pipeline. So we're seeing more and more interest in that. The other kind of cool thing,
I mean, that does seem like a very sustainable in multiple ways business model.
It's really neat because we operate at such low capacity factors, and when we run, the prices are high, right? So we actually have the ability to purchase renewable natural gas. You always say, well, RNG is too expensive. It's like compared
for
to what?
Your needs, right?
Yeah, if I'm running 87, 60 every hour of the year, RNG might be too expensive. But when we run at 3 or 4% of the hours, and we, like, for example, in the California example, we're participating in a program with PG&E. It's called the Base Interruptible Program, and you just get paid dollars per kilowatt month, right? So it's a capacity payment to be ready, and you get called. It's kind of like their last line of defense against rolling blackout. So for the grid operator terms, they call it EEA2. Right? Oh, yeah. And so it's literally the last resource they're going to call. To participate in it, you have to be in a renewable category, right? Either has to be demand, or if it's some kind of generation, it has to be classified by the California PUC as in this renewable category. So we have to do that, but again, it's going to be called. I mean, a big year for them is like 30, 40 hours, right? I
mean, ideally, they don't want to.
They don't want to call it.
Right.
Now they've called it more than they wanted to recently.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And it can be called up to 180 hours. I think is the cap. But again, I'm getting paid in this fixed capacity payment that is that when I run, and I don't run often, I'm relatively indifferent to buying renewable natural gas at literally 10x the cost of. Actually, it's not 10x in California, but let's say it's $25 versus, I don't know where California is right now, about $5. So it's probably like 5x the cost, but we're indifferent to that. So we are working with renewable natural gas developers, and we just closed our first deal. I guess I probably shouldn't have said that because the press release isn't out yet. But that's fine. You can keep it in. But our PR people beat me up. But
that's why the CEO is never allowed out.
I know. I know. So it's okay. It's okay. But we just did our first deal, and so we work directly with the developers on long-term offtake, and it helps them finance. And because we're good buyers, now they can finance their next.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. It's perfect.
Right. And so we're one of the few that can actually go out and buy 10 or 15 kind of a 10 or 15 year renewable natural gas purchase agreement, and so we're helping that industry develop.
That's
right?
awesome.
So, and again, we're just seeing a lot of interest in this, especially from the data centers, because the final customers of the data centers are exactly who you think they would be. It's Microsoft and Google and AWS, and they have corporate mandates. So, but yeah, we're super excited about that. So as far as kind of, I don't know if I've unpacked everything yet. As far as like the state. The state bans, it's interesting because there's a lot of opposition in California, but I mean we're just doing this in the middle of Silicon Valley, and kind of the requirement that we had to get new gas service in the city of San Jose. I think city of San Jose was that we had to have the ultra low local emissions, right? And so it worked out fine. I don't know that as far as you think about the future of natural gas, or like we're just going to ditch it. I don't think that's going to happen. Our sense is we're going to continue to decarbonize natural gas, whether it's through injection of RNG, hydrogen blending. We have a grant that we were awarded from the California Energy Commission to do blending, I think up to 30% hydrogen with natural gas with our engines, and we actually do a lot of work on the fuel control side to kind of get to the high level of hydrogen blending. So we think that what you'll see is, because the natural gas infrastructure it is so extensive, we think you'll see a general decarbonization of the natural gas infrastructure. You're going to see a lot of tightening literally, figuratively on any methane leaks on pipelines. It's going to be incredibly important. But there's amazing technology now to detect leaks, right? And they're using drones and everything else, and so like that's always the backlash you hear from some folks about pipelines. Is like, well, they leak. It's like, well, okay, I guess we're not going to use any of this great technology on pipelines. No, we are. All the pipelines now are implementing really, really strict controls using drones, everything else to find leaks, correct them, to do preventative stuff. So that's just part of being in the natural gas transportation business now. So,
by the way, we have a drone.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, Austin is Austin.
Cool.
One of the things on Austin's to-do list is to become a certified drone pilot.
Yes,
very cool.
It's a lot harder than you'd think, which is challenging when we have so many other things we have to do.
That's fantastic. Actually, I just watched a video this morning on what the Navy's doing with naval drones. Super cool. It was on a Wall Street Journal online thing, but the drone stuff's just incredible. I mean, whether it's kind of civilian or military use, it's just amazing.
But anyway, I do want to put a cherry on top of what you just said, which is, it sounds like you guys. I mean, and you always have been. You've been very forward thinking, and and I think and this is one of the things that we've talked about in Northwest RiverPartners for hydropower. Like, our mission used to just be a strong voice for hydropower, and hydropower needs a strong voice, right? I know that's great, but when we started, we proposed a new mission to our board, which is to lead the charge for the Northwest to realize its clean energy potential with hydroelectricity as a cornerstone. And the point was that it's not hydro for hydro's sake or dams for dam's sake. It's like, what does hydro bring to society, right? And I think that makes, we want to be good citizens, and I think I love hearing how you guys have approached that. So it's very cool.
Yeah, it's if you kind of think about it from the standpoint of this contingency capacity or grid stability, we think the world looks like a place where you'll have your baseload hydro nukes, whatever, that are still around, and you have a lot of other plants that are retiring. Hopefully they don't retire the dams. And
no, they're not going to.
Right, and so we have that's your job, Kurt.
Right, exactly.
But so you have a lot of the zero carbon baseload stuff that needs to stay around forever, and then and then we're bringing in intermittent supply, but you need intermittent supply, then you need something to stabilize it. So we think kind of, if you look at natural gas use and the electric grid, I think it's all going to migrate to kind of our model, which is this kind of very low capacity factor, contingency capacity, and again when you're doing that, you can fully offset the carbon with RNG, because you're down at less than 5%, right? And you're operating during emergency periods. I think the grid needs to evolve. We still haven't kind of figured this out, because we have all this kind of zero variable cost, like wind and solar, negative on wind because of the production tax credit coming into the grid, and that kind of destroys the energy price signal. And so I think over time the grid has to figure out how to pay for that contingency capacity, and it will, because it has to, right? And so you're going to have intermittent supply, and it's not, and so you'll have batteries. Batteries have their part, but you still need a fuel. You still need duration, and you're seeing all of the grid operators like, okay, no, we don't need 2 hour, we need 4 hour. No, we need 8 hour batteries. No, we need 12 hour batteries. And at some point,
we need 6 day batteries.
Yeah. And so okay, why don't we just use a fuel? And by the way, if you need like 100 hour batteries, just use a nuke.
We're pro nuclear as well.
I mean, that kind of, I don't know. We have time to get into the whole AI thing, but I think that power, like we're trying to decarbonize and do all that and retire all these plants while all of a sudden electricity has become this amazing growth business, right? And I think that's an interesting topic, but I'm not the one asking the question.
Yeah. So do you want to go there, Austin? Or I'm sorry.
I think that'd be
we're
great.
Long on time. So,
I think that'd be great. But the one thing I'll say too, just real quickly, is you go to back to the 5th grade level, which, by the way, I was not Thomas in 5th grade. I think my primary concern was seeing if I could get the kickball over the elementary school building at recess.
Right.
But,
well, you're a communicator.
Right,
yes.
right. Yeah, I was trying to communicate with the people on the other side of the school.
That's awesome.
But, it makes sense, right, that the fuel exists, so we might as well be using it. I mean, to your point, just letting it go into the atmosphere versus actually putting it to work, it seems like a really logical place to end up, though. As we know, logic doesn't always win the day in the energy business.
Right. There's different class citizens with regards to zero carbon, right? I guess you guys know that very well.
Yes, we do know that very well.
Yeah, but anyways, I think we should go there. I don't know if maybe you have a better way of formulating the question for that.
I guess one of the things that we have really been talking about. No, first of all, the whole idea of we've really been working hard to even the playing field for hydropower in terms of how it's perceived, right? Because wind and solar, which are very important to decarbonizing the grid, and that's great, but it doesn't, kind of as you were saying, it doesn't work without a carbon-free resource like nuclear, like hydropower, to actually make sure there's power available on demand when people need it. And we're actually having some pretty good success in bringing the region back around to that importance, which is pretty exciting. I mean, we're very excited about that. But one of the things we talk about all the time is the state of the grid, right? And so we've been really concerned. The Western Electricity Coordinating Council, the North American Energy Reliability Corporation, all these organizations responsible for reliability have been issuing warnings nationwide, including for the West, including even for the Pacific Northwest. And you and I talked about this before. Not only are we retiring these fossil fueled resources to fight climate change, but then we're trying to electrify transportation and home heating, right? So you're getting rid of supply that's reliable, and you're putting all this demand on the system. Right. But one of the things that you and I talked about offline that I thought was fascinating is what you're seeing in terms of demand created by artificial intelligence.
It's crazy. So we're working with a lot of data centers now, and the scale of the data centers is just unbelievable. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, a big data center was like 10 megawatts, right? And it was relatively easy, so I was just going to back it up with diesel. And then they've slowly grown in scale, and then maybe 5 years ago, a big data center was 100 megawatts. They're talking about gigawatt plus data centers now, and and 100% of these being dedicated to AI.
And just for people to know, a gigawatt, not only that's about that same amount of energy it took the DeLorean to go back to the future, but it's about the size of a large nuclear power plant, right? So,
and so you have these humongous data centers that are supporting AI, and so what we're seeing is that once that data center gets built and they put all the servers in there and they use NVIDIA's GPU or wherever, and they have this set up, it's power in and AI out, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of that simple. And so what we're seeing is like literally every market where they're building the data centers is now power constrained. And, whether it's up here, and I know of a couple cases where guys have gone to prime power because they just can't get new utility service. Silicon Valley, I mean, you go to Silicon Valley Power right now, I think the wait's like 5-6 years for new service for the data center. Oh my gosh,
really?
Yeah, Phoenix, I mean, it's just like they're completely at capacity. Northern Virginia, the same. You go internationally, it's Dublin, Ireland. I mean, I just keep going down the list of all the major data centers locations, and it's just really, really hard to get new service. And so there's a lot of unfilled demand. And I mean, you can just kind of see this slow motion train wreck of this insatiable appetite, insatiable demand for AI, which is already starting to happen, and how that hits the wall with power. So power ends up becoming the constraint to AI, actually getting power. Right now, they're going to make the processing chips, whether it's GPU, CPU, they're going to make those more efficient. Right. That has to happen. And AI, by the way, will help make kind of end-use processes more efficient and come up with crazy, innovative things you haven't even thought about. But it's one of those things. It's like, well, that's going to drive even more demand for AI, right? And so we think this is kind of this cycle that it says, okay, you have AI happening, which is like this exponential increase in demand and these huge concentrated loads. And you're electrifying everything, like you mentioned, heat, transportation, and we're putting all that on the grid, and we're retiring power plants that are dispatchable. So you kind of this, again, that is kind of the slow motion train wreck that the grid's going through right now. Mm-hmm. And I think that what we're seeing that's so interesting right now is really two things. One is for us to provide bridge power, like we kind of a data center has an 18-month gap, and we'll come in and actually run in prime for some period of time, and then
run in prime.
Provide 100% of their power until the new electric service gets there, and then we go into backup mode. But I think kind of an even more important concept is that these large concentrated loads, they can't get new service unless they provide flexibility back to the grid operator, whether it's an ISO or electric utility, regulated utility. They have to be able to provide that. And so that for a big
and that means they essentially have to be able to shut down operations or
turn on generation.
Or turn on generation.
Yeah, it's one of the two. So a Bitcoin miner can basically say, okay, I'm above a certain price and power, they just shut down and stop mining, right? Mm-hmm. Data centers can't do that. They have to keep operating, right? And so they have to have generation, have to have flexible generation. And so what we're seeing in all these, like literally everywhere in the world right now, in the industrialized kind of grid world, where you have, you've had existing grids for a while, there's about 100 to 500 hours a year that are at risk. And you have to be able to come off the grid for 100 to 500 hours. And it's amazing. It's like everywhere we go, we see the same thing. And sometimes they say it's less than 100, then it ends up being more, right? But so, and you have to be able to do that in a way that's like environmentally sound and sustainable, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can't do that with diesel. And so it's crazy. Like we see these plans, like, okay, you're going to install 500 megawatts of diesel?
Wow.
Is that right? Right. So like that okay, you try that once. Right? I don't care where you go, you will get community pushback for that, right? So it's just like, so there's a really a need for flexible capacity. So just to get new service, right? And so we're seeing where grid operators are saying, look, unless you can do that, you're not getting service. And so what happens is the people that can provide flexibility get the service, and the people that can't don't. The other thing that's interesting, and this does get into nukes, I mean, we actually are doing an analysis of like what's happening over the next, just until 2030, and it's just incredible the amount of new generation that's needed to do all these things we're talking about, right? And again, electrify everything, AI, all that, and retire the older plants. I'm not quite sure how you get there without nukes. I just don't know, and because I guess we could build a bunch of coal plants. Well, that's not going to happen, right? And you're not going to be able to dam any more rivers. You want to keep the ones operating you have, and so it seems to us like at some point, just that kind of this massive increase in electric consumption over the next 10 to 20 years does lead us to a place like what is what's the kind of the risk assessment that says you shouldn't build any new nukes? It's like, okay, let's just continue to kind of warm the climate? No. I mean, I think that on a relative basis, people start looking at nukes in a different light. I'm a little biased. I came from that industry, so I admit it. But there's just the technology that we're looking at today is like 4 or 5 generations removed from the stuff that's even operating. Mm-hmm. And so, it's interesting because we always make this assumption, like this magic happens assumption with like batteries. Like somehow we're gonna get to 100-hour battery at low cost, and again, there's somewhere in the middle of it, and then magic happens. It's like, okay, like how is it that you can make that assumption on batteries, but you're not going to make that assumption? And I'm not saying it's not going to happen on batteries, but how can you make that assumption but not make it on nukes? It's like that we're going to come up, whether it's fission or fusion, we're going to be able to figure this out, right? Mm-hmm. And I actually think AI is a part of that, and so I'm incredibly optimistic on kind of bringing nukes back into the supply stack, electricity, keeping what we have that's zero carbon, right? Don't retire zero carbon assets. That's crazy. And in the meantime, you use natural gas in the way we're talking about, and to buffer intermittent supply, and so we'll continue to do wind and solar and batteries and other types of grid stability assets. But at some point, we're also going to have to do nukes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's this is just math.
That is, I always say, I'm serious, like one of my closing lines in most of my presentations is like policymakers have to do the math.
It's just math.
Before they do the policy.
Maybe it is. I don't even think it's 5th grade. It's like 4th grade.
Right. So what you're saying is every time you go into ChatGPT and you ask it to make some new creepy image,
right?
You have a carbon footprint you need to be thinking about. Yeah.
It's a dirty little secret.
Yeah. So. I know that we have things we want to try and hit on here, and we're getting down to the end. One quick thing that I'll just interject with is we actually had another Thomas and Kurt duo on the podcast a few weeks ago.
Okay.
That's right.
Thomas Mosier and Kurt Myers from Idaho National Laboratory, and I should mention Ted Austin as well from Fall River because he joined us, and that would be disrespectful not to include him in that, but. We had those guys on to talk about this like microgrid in a box idea.
They're doing a lot of great work out there.
Yeah, and I was curious, if that kind of like plays into maybe future things for what we're looking at.
I guess all I can say on that is we're definitely looking at ways to integrate nukes in the future, and working with partners that are that are in the business, and actually 1 or 2 of them that work at Idaho.
Yeah.
So it is something that's very interesting to us. If I had to guess, I think what you'll see developing is like you'll have like a 1 megawatt node, a 10 megawatt node, and like a 100 megawatt node, and it's just kind of the natural order of magnitude stuff. But what always fascinates me is like, I don't know. I'm assuming you guys go to the dentist.
Absolutely.
And you get X-rays, right? It's like somehow we've gotten comfortable, like in so many places in our life. Like here's radiation, here's how we manage it. Mm-hmm. I mean, like these strip centers, everything else is like, here's this, here's this this CAT scan thing. Here, it's just like, okay, maybe there's a way to think about, smaller nukes in that way. But yeah, I think that there's going to be tremendous opportunity. Going forward, I'm very bullish on again whether it's in a microgrid application or larger. I think one of the larger applications. There was one of the national labs did a study on repowering at old coal plants. Right, to me that's fantastic, right? Because you have cooling water, transmission infrastructure, right? And so it's just like, okay, let's. I mean, we could probably, and I think they came up with like 75% of the operational coal plants you could bring in SMRs, right? So that's kind of the big stuff. You have, I think Dow announced some kind of behind the meter nuke.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to see.
And SMR, small modular reactors, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, small modular reactors. And so I actually do think the large concentrated loads probably will push nukes more than the utilities will. I had an interesting discussion with a public company CEO, an investor-owned utility public company, and he was making that point. He's like, especially like the large data centers. I mean, they have humongous balance sheets, and like their market cap won't even take a dent if they announce a nuke, right? And whereas the utilities are like a small fraction of that, and they take a 20% hit if they announce a nuke, right? So but kind of an interesting concept just from a financial perspective. Who has the wherewithal to do it? And so, if I had to guess, I would say that kind of the large concentrated data centers dedicated to AI probably will drive the nukes. And again, I don't know what the technology is, but it just the math gets you there.
Mm-hmm. And kind of going off of that note, just looking prediction wise, I mean, do you think that it sounds like that's the direction we're heading, but do you think that maybe the challenge of getting there is something that we're starting to overcome, or are we still a long ways off?
I think we're a long ways off. I think I think the first step is folks recognizing that, okay, the math doesn't work, there's a problem here, and we're starting to see that. I don't think there's any consensus on like what to do next. Mm-hmm. From our perspective, we're just seeing a lot of folks take things into their own hands, and we help them with that. But that can only solve a certain amount of the problem. Mm-hmm. But I'm concerned sometimes that it feels like we have to break it before we fix it, and it's like I don't think that has to happen. I know it doesn't have to happen, but there's got to be some realism in the discussions that instead of everybody like getting polarized and going like, okay, here's like fossil fuel people and like an old hydro people, not old age, but old like stuff that's built, right?
Careful, Thomas.
That's right. We started the discussion saying that we must be old if we've been friends for 30 years, and then here's like the solar and storage guys, and it's like, okay, there's got to be a way to like have a discussion. It's like, let's be responsible here, and not just have to break everything. And so I tend to end up in an optimistic place usually, or else I wouldn't have started up a business. But I think that the sooner we can get there, the better. The work you guys are doing is fantastic, and helping folks understand kind of the reality of the situation, and that physics matters, stuff like real things
math matters.
Math matters, physics matter. We live in a physical world as much as we all want to be online, and we still live in a physical world. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that we're kind of recognizing the problem, right, is always the first step. So I think we're starting to recognize the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think we're at that stage of the show where Austin shifts gears.
Well, we're just about there. Yeah, one last thing that
okay.
I'll ask.
Sorry.
No. I mean, it is shifting gears, but one thing I'll ask you guys. I know that you're itching to get out of here and go hiking. Where are you guys going today?
Gosh, I was thinking Dog Mountain.
Ooh, okay.
Which Thomas just like climbed a mountain, and so yeah. I figure he's up for it. What I'm afraid of is just like 25 years ago when him and Lori and I all went hiking, and I was much younger than them and everything like that. And I was just huffing and huffing, and they were just like. Now I think it's because they were from Houston and they're just like used to heat and humidity, so it's almost like a different it's like different gravity there.
Right. Right.
But anyway, my goal today is to keep up.
So I'm sure you'll be ahead of me.
Well, you'll also get to pass by Bonneville Dam, which is
Right.
fantastic. And I will say too, there's another hike out there, and I can't remember. I think it might be Table Mountain.
Okay, yeah.
It's the trailhead's at Beacon Rock State Park, but it's across. If you go to park at Beacon Rock, there's a
I know exactly what you mean. Right.
Yeah. So you go up. There's a waterfall up there. You hike past that, and I did that hike back in February. We had that like irregularly nice day.
Yeah.
And the view up there, I think Dog Mountain's probably too far away, but the view up there, you can actually like look down at Bonneville from like this super high view.
Oh, that's
it's
cool.
Super
Nice.
cool. So,
Yeah.
Nice.
but yeah, I mean, today's a beautiful day. You guys should have
I'm
a
excited.
good time
Yeah,
up there
I'm
for sure.
excited.
So yeah, we do shift gears here at the end. We like I was kind of telling you before we started recording, we always try and get back to like, okay, let's talk about interesting subjects, but let's also get to know the people behind energy. And the way that I like to do that is to kind of put people on the spot a little bit, which some appreciate more than others, and give you kind of an opportunity to talk about something that's meaningful to you. And so I ask everyone for life advice here right at the end, like just something, whether it's something you've always lived by or something that maybe just recently you read and you're like, gosh, that really speaks to me and I'm taking that to heart. Is there anything you could share with our audience that kind of, might hit home for them?
You mentioned it earlier about being a mission-driven company. I think it's incredibly important to have something like that because, the stuff that we do is hard. And I mean, you got to dig in, but it's like if you kind of have that mission-driven thing, like you're focused on helping in some way, right? Helping the environment, helping people, whatever, some combination of things. I just think that it just gives purpose to what you're doing past just getting a paycheck. And I've always tried to look for those types of opportunities. Again, what is the true purpose behind this? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? And the other thing is, like, if you truly are doing something that matters and you're changing the world, making it a better place, it's like people just get excited about that, right? And so it's not just you personally, but it's like your team. Everybody kind of like they're motivated and they want to stick around and keep doing it. And they're just in so many places where you can go work that just doesn't exist. And you always hear about the quiet quitting and all that stuff, and it's like people just checking out, and when people are excited about what they do, they don't check out, and you're helping them have a purpose in what they do. So it's kind of a neat thing. So I always try to look for those opportunities. Like, what am I really doing here? Does it matter? Am I making the world a better place, or is this just kind of, I don't know, just going in circles? And so that's important. But I think it's interesting because we have a lot of long-term relationships at the company, and the other thing is I like being around people that I like, right? I like working with people that I'm friends with, and I have this assumption that I'm capable of incredibly stupid things. So I want to be around people that say, "Well, that was stupid," and so you want to be around good friends that say, "Okay, look what Thomas just did," but he also is capable of doing these great things. So we're all going to work together on this. And so I always have to surround myself with super strong people that are my friends, and we all kind of help each other out. So I think that's an important thing. Just to again work with people that you like and you want to be around, and it just makes things more fun too.
Certainly. So, I mean, we live it here, right, on both fronts, I think, and it's been just a great opportunity. It's allowed things like this podcast to exist, right? So right. That really speaks to me, and obviously it speaks to what you've been able to do as well with your background and where you are today, and everything that Enchanted Rock is accomplishing. So I think that example is certainly being followed when we look at what you're saying and what you've been able to do. When I came up with this concept, it was significantly later than when we recorded our first episode, which was, I think we recorded our first episode in August, released it in January, and then started doing follow-up podcast episodes. And so I feel a little bit bad that I robbed Kurt of the opportunity to do this also. So, now you're here. You're on the other side of the glass. Could you also maybe give us something as well?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, it was an honor to get to be back on the podcast, even if it was forced by one of our guests. So I appreciate that. Now, everything that Thomas said, I just want to say amen to in terms of the advice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel so blessed to get to work with Austin, my board, our members. We are surrounded by amazing people. And I, every day, feel driven to fight for those people, to fight for the cause. And it's a real pleasure to be able to do that, to be able to say, like, yeah, you know what, this work matters, and to have great people around you to help you accomplish some of those things. So I feel myself very blessed. So I don't know if that's advice, but just to say that I definitely agree with Thomas. If you can surround yourself with bright, dedicated people, you're going to accomplish great things. And so I guess I'm just going to say ditto.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too there is, a lot of times with the advice thing, it's like we try and get to, getting beyond work, but inevitably you do have to work. I mean, hopefully, hopefully you find something, right? So I think that it's important, and I also think too, on both fronts, it's like, even if your mission is just to help your family, even if it's just to surround yourself with good people in your life. I mean, I think that it applies, beyond what we're doing here, but it's also really important to have in your work, right? If you're doing the quiet quitting thing, you're probably not too happy with where you are in general and in your life and your journey. So, I really appreciate that. And like I said, again, thanks for flying out here and being here. I mean, the dynamic of being in the studio is undeniably awesome. I mean, I love all of our guests that we've had on, and doing it through Zoom is super helpful in that way. But to have you here in person has been really fun. So thank you.
I think it's more effective in person. So I've enjoyed being here.
And you get to go hiking.
Yes. That actually, by the way, that is another piece of like personal advice. Just keep challenging yourself. Don't find the next literal, figurative mountain to climb, right? I mean, it's just so important to have something outside of work. And we did this Half Dome hike, and it was great. We had five of us from work, and then a friend from the Navy, and we're all in this this big training program for that. And I mean, it was we're like, I don't know, but I guess we can do Half Dome. Let's go do it, right? And I think I was the oldest at 60. But I mean, it was a blast. We trained hard. We were ready. We had a great time. Everybody made it. Nobody got hurt. So it's good to okay, let's go find something else to do and challenge yourself like that personally. So.
Well, it sounds like you guys got a challenge ahead of you today.
Yeah. So, and personal thanks, Thomas, for coming out. And like I said, it's nice to have long-term friends, and we really appreciate you. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
In keeping tradition with our in-studio releases of Damn, of which there are now 2, I'm going to skip over doing the usual outro that you've probably grown accustomed to hearing when I wrap up an episode with one of our guests that we recorded via Zoom. Now, in full disclosure, I should also probably mention to you that I'm staring down the barrel of midnight at the moment, and these episodes release at 12:01 on Friday morning. So it's getting a little late here, and I'm running out of time to get the finishing touches put on this thing so I can get it out the door into your ears for your listening pleasure. And somehow, I forgot to record an outro for this episode. So I got to go off the cuff here. I don't have any of the comforts of RiverPartners HQ, our nice cow couch, and the microphones that sound so much better than the in-computer microphone that I'm currently using. But nonetheless, we're going to run through the housekeeping here real quick, and we're going to get this thing done. So first and foremost, I always remind you to please leave your reviews on your favorite listening platform, which I assume you're using at the moment to listen to this podcast. The positive 5-star reviews are essential to helping us grow our audience, and we really sincerely appreciate those, as it's a tremendous help to us, and hopefully it doesn't take too much time out of your day. While you're there, we also encourage you to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so that you don't miss any future episodes of Dam, which arrive every other Friday. Other than that, we also encourage you to write into us using the contact form on our website, which is nwriverpartners.org. We always love to hear from you, and quite frankly, sometimes it's just nice to know that our listeners are real. We see the numbers on the analytics side of things on the hosting platform we use, but that doesn't necessarily always translate to feeling like there's actually people out there who really want to hear about these issues and care about what we're doing here at the podcast. So we'd love to hear from you. Please write into us. You can also email us directly using the email address info@nwriverpartners. Either way you go, we'd love to hear from you. We want to know what your favorite episode was, maybe what you want to hear on future episodes, or if you've got some great guests that we could possibly have on. Give us anything and everything you want to throw our way, and we'll gladly accept it. Even the negative stuff. As far as anything else that I can think of right now goes, I would definitely encourage you to check us out on social media. We're at NW River Partners on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X, which was formerly Twitter. I'm not used to saying it still. I probably assume you're not quite used to the whole X thing either, but hey, we're getting through it, and eventually maybe we'll all get it down. Otherwise, I think that's going to do it for now. The delusion is probably starting to set in at this point. It's getting so late, so I got to get this thing done. I got to get it posted, and then I got to go to bed. But I hope you all are enjoying your morning or afternoon or whatever time of day it is when you're listening to this. And until next time, see ya.